Jeff, I wanted to start this week with the women's test, and that's going to be the main conversation we have in segment one. However, the statement from the ECB that lobbed about an hour ago is worth just touching on off the top, because it does at least a little bit change the framework of the conversation that's been ongoing about the Ashes. So where we left this last week was that Cricket Australia were going to send to the ECB the final quarantine provisions. The sense we got from Joe Root is that they were pretty chilled about what they were hearing. There was no guarantees. They were going to look at what they were going to go through with the fine-tooth comb, get the final offer. But, you know, he said himself he was dead keen to go, desperate to be part of an Ashes series, all the rest of it. My interpretation late last week when doing a couple of interviews about this was that, well, kind of disaster averted. And then we had the news from the Australian government, National Cabinet to be precise, that from probably November the 14th, you can fly into Australia, you can fly into Sydney and do 7 days home quarantine. Not even go into hotel queue, no more international caps. This all felt like, well, any hurdles that were left really have been knocked down before they've had to think about it too seriously, with still 6 weeks to go until they're meant to fly into Australia. However, Jeff, the statement from the ECB this morning does leave considerable wriggle room for them to pull out altogether, which feels a touch out of step with what we're hearing in Australia at the moment.
Yeah, so this is the closing paragraph was the only one that actually mattered in this statement. The rest of it was, we are talking to our players and we are talking to Australia. Yes, no shit, thank you. The closing part. Later this week, the ECB board will meet to decide whether the conditions in place are sufficient for the tour to go ahead and enable the selection of a squad befitting a series of this significance. Now, two things to note here. One is that they capitalise the word tour, which means maybe they're talking about the bicycle race. Maybe this is all just a red herring to send us down the wrong path.
They've got the bug from that CA statement that went out, that was hurried out the door with Justin Langer a couple of weeks ago, with random capitalisations all the way through it. Looks like it was written by a boomer on their phone.
Big Gary Ablett in his car energy when you're just throwing in the random caps. So the tour, look, maybe the ECB, it does have a silent W in it for Wales, the England and Wales Cricket Board. So maybe the C also stands for cycling, the England Cycling Board, but probably not. But basically the hint of that is we don't want to have to pick a squad of random no-hopers because the main players aren't going to come. So they're pretty much saying if our good players won't go, then we won't go. Which, you know, that's the bit that might give you some cause for concern. I still have the belief that the Ashes will happen no matter what, because there's too much money involved and all of this is just positioning. It's all for leverage. It's all to make sure they get the best possible deal and to make sure that CA is fighting tooth and nail to get the ECB what they want. But it does just raise the possibility that it could not.
Right, so it feels to me as though, as you say, Jeff, this is about leverage and just making sure that they get everything they want in this final offer. However, where I think there's a degree of inconsistency here is that I think they're going to get that anyway, just because the law of the land is changing very quickly. I mean, I was able to jump on Qantas's website on Friday morning and book flights home. Now, I know I'm an Australian citizen, so that means that I don't have the same challenge as the England players on that front. But if they're allowing people to fly home on full flights to Sydney as of November, middle of November or whatever it works out to be, once the nation hits 80%, Queensland's getting to 80% according to projections by the 4th of December, 4 days before the first Ashes test. It feels like everything is actually at long last in Australia, moving in the right direction, and they're going to get there just in the nick of time. I would still say it'd be advisable to start the Ashes a fraction later, but if they are going to start on December 8 as planned, and CA have been rather adamant about this, it doesn't feel anywhere near as problematic as it did a month ago, when it was so unclear whether the vaccination rate would get to 80% in time. It was very unclear about what quarantine provisions would be there for the England team. It might be that, Jeff, they've seen this Sheffield Shield game get cancelled last week. They see horrible stories like the one that was circulating on social media yesterday about the poor woman who came to England to bury her dying mother and couldn't get back into Australia because quarantine was full, and she's got 3 kids waiting at home. And I mean, you hear horrible stories like that, and they do get amplified via social media. And I totally respect why there's a degree of trepidation when you hear stuff like that. However, a more balanced view would be that Australia is actually going to be fine. They'll probably end up doing 7 days home quarantine, not 14, if they are willing to fly into New South Wales, for example, which might have another degree of complexity with Queensland trailing New South Wales on the vaccine front. But they have a lot of options now that didn't feel available to them a month ago when this conversation first came to the boil.
And their best case scenario looks a lot better than it did a couple of months ago as well. So it does feel like these concerns are about 6 weeks out of date. If you were travelling to Australia right now today to play the series, you would have these concerns. But if you've got a couple of months bought time ahead of you, then it doesn't seem like there's so much need to be concerned. And it does puzzle me, this thing that you're talking about of stories coming up on the news in the UK and in the US and so on, pointing at Australia and saying, oh, look how terrible it is. They're being mean to people by making them do quarantine and having restrictions and so on. There's like 1 million dead people between those two countries, and there aren't in Australia. I mean, I can tell you which one I'd rather be in terms of how they've handled this virus and this disease. It's a bizarre thing for a couple of countries that have absolutely screwed it at every possible juncture, to the point that literally 1 million people are dead, that they want to point at a country that hasn't had that happen and say, oh, the real problem's happening over there. It is truly bizarre to me.
Let's exclude America from this because their vaccination uptake hasn't been what it's been in the UK. I would put to you in response to that the fact that over 80% of people in this country have been double jabs for yonks reflects the fact that they got part 2 right after catastrophically botching part 1. That doesn't deny critics from the outside saying that Australia botched part 2, because Australia did botch part 2. Australia would be open right now. You wouldn't be in lockdown right now if the federal government didn't fuck up their vaccine acquisition and they didn't have such timid support for AstraZeneca at the crucial time when they basically said you can go vaccine shopping in order to try and make sure that they hoover up preferences from nutbag anti-vaxxers at the next federal election. If none of that happened, we'd be at 80% in Oz already, and this knock-on effect with the Ashes wouldn't even be a conversation. So I don't think it's unreasonable for England's players to be living where they're living right now in an open country and seeing Australia and thinking, fuck, is it really going to happen? Like 12 million people in lockdown now, we're meant to be there, next month? Is it really going to be, I get why there's anxiety, but I wish that the statement today acknowledged that things have gotten dramatically better in the last month. Yep. I completely agree. If you're starting the Ashes next week, well, you couldn't. You couldn't. The caravan could not move from state to state the way that CA will want it to make sure the state associations get what they need out of it. The TV networks couldn't move around either, and it would be a shit show. But it's not going to be a shit show on the 8th of December, when the Ashes are meant to start, based on the best forecast that we've got at the moment. And the government wouldn't have made those announcements last week unless the forecasts were robust. You couldn't risk. Imagine they said to the world, Australia's open for business from the middle of November, only to fuck it up. I mean, they would never do that, expectation management wise. So I'm sure they're being conservative even with what they said last week. So yeah, like you said, Jeff, maybe 6 weeks out of date.
Speaking of robust forecasts, I enjoyed this is just a little bit of local flavour for those of you in the UK. Over the weekend in Melbourne, there was a forecast for about 6 days of rain in a row. Just rain. Saturday and Sunday, both beautiful. There was a bit of rain in the evening, but, a lot of long sunny patches during the day. Lovely time to go and have a picnic. The theory circulating now is that the Premier, Dan Andrews, is working with the Bureau of Meteorology to fix the weather forecast so that people don't make plans to go and see each other outside. So in the same way that apparently the bomb has been fixing the data so that we all believe in the fraud of climate change, they're also fixing the anti-picnic forecasts to make sure we don't go and spend time in the sun.
I mean, having spent a bit of time in politics, I wish we could fix shit like that. I mean, if you could fix shit like that, you can fix just about anything, can't you? No.
If you can't control the Daily Telly front page, you can't control the weather forecast.
Exactly. If you can't control what's going on at Hull Street, what hope do you have? I also noted, there was Joe Root's comments last week, about his desperation to be there, but showing a little bit of caution about sort of going all in. And Tim Paine returned serve in classic sort of Ashes Bantz style. I think that a lot of what Tim Paine said was quite sensible, by the way, that it makes sense for them to want England to have excellent conditions here, because at some point soon Australia are going back to England and they're not going to want to be stuck in sort of relatively punitive conditions. So it all tallies that it's in Australia's interest for England to effectively get what they want here. But the little drive-by at the end around, basically the Ashes are happening, champion, get on the plane or fuck off. Now he was less crude than that, and he did note that in the modern world you are permitted not to come, and if you don't want to come, that's perfectly fine. But can't wait to get you to the Gabba. Was fairly clear as well. The subtext was pretty clear, and it didn't travel well, Jeff. When people read that report here on Friday morning, there was a sense of like, for fuck's sake, is Tim Paine lecturing? Is Tim Paine offering a lecture to the England players on this? Now, that wasn't the case, but I get why it didn't travel well. I read Barney Renee's riposte to it, which was fearsome. And I certainly appreciate that that's a perspective on this as well.
I saw the reporting on this, and so I went and found the clip and listened to the whole segment. And look, this may be unpopular coming. I wouldn't say I've been 100% green and gold supporter of the Australian team over the years. I thought it was fine. Like, I listened to it and I thought, yeah, okay. Obviously Tim Paine knows that what he says will be reported, and he's not naive in that way, and he knows it will be picked up. But it was pretty tame, and what he was saying was accurate in that the series will happen. All of this sort of angst about will it or will it not go ahead, it will go ahead, and that a team will come, and it doesn't matter if a few members of that team decide not to come. 11 players will be there for the first test match in a squad of 15 or 16 or 32 or however many they pick these days. It's going to happen. So I just felt like he was saying, look, stop all of this faffing around about it and all of this back and forth, this palaver, this brouhaha, if you will, which was more measured than the tone of the show he was on, which was a lot of like, oh, the big fella's giving him a clip on the way through kind of stuff. They wanted him to go harder on it, and he wasn't. So, look, I thought it was not unreasonable, but obviously anything mentioned about either country about the other one inflames parochial tensions at a time like this.
Yeah, I think I agree with all of that. I listened to chunks of it before we recorded today, and having read the comments and then having heard the comments, I think it was, yeah, I agree that it wasn't him going out to go all guns a-blazing, but there was enough, he's savvy enough to know that how that's going to end up getting reported at the same time. So I suppose good on him for getting out there and using his platform. He's got a radio show now, and he knows how to drive the agenda. He's been around for a very long time, Tim Paine. So you can kind of professional respect on that front. Respect the hustle. You know what I mean? But equally, I understand why people in this country, the aforementioned 140,000 people that died of COVID, don't particularly take kindly to even a subtle lecturing from anyone about how hard it's been over the last couple of years. So I would have thought that COVID might provide a bit of a pause in the predictable, nauseous Ashes Bantz that we're about to get, but unfortunately not. I'm going to write my column for Wisdom Cricket Monthly about this later today, about about it's coming. You can feel it.
It'll just provide more ammo.
Ashes Bantz is on the way, and COVID's, but yeah, exactly. COVID's going to be part of the weaponry rather than something that might cause the opposing sides. And I say that extending beyond the 22 players and into the, I saw some stuff from the Australian press this week, and I've seen some stuff in the UK papers last week, and without even sort of, we're a month and a half away, or 2 months away, sorry, and we already know what it's going to look like in 2 months' time. It always does. It's just so boring.
We'll have Nathan Lyon going down into the stump microphone saying, "How was your PPE procurement through the first few months of the pandemic, champion? How was the transparency on your contract provisions from donors to the lead party in government?" Look forward to it. Good time.